Yes, so today, as I think you all know very well, today is the Disappearance Day of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and the Disappearance Day of Sri Gadadhar Pandit from the Panchatattva. So we'll say some words about them rather than have our regular Bhagavatam class. But to begin, we'll sing this song, Ye Anilo Premadana. Anyway, Saparshada Bhagavat Viraha Vilap is the actual title. Lamentation and separation from the devotees of the Lord. Sung by Narottam Das Thakur, and lamenting the disappearance. Well, someone's made a mistake here, gosh. It's actually Srinivasa Acharya, and not exactly Advaita Acharya, but anyway. Yeah, so all different associates of Narottam Das Thakur is lamenting his separation from all these different associates of Lord Chaitanya. Actually, to begin, let me just read through it. The translation, verse 1. He who brought the treasure of divine love and who was filled with compassion and mercy, where is such a personality as Srinivasa Acharya gone? Where are my Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where is Raghunath Das, the savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? And where is Krishnadas Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against rock and enter into fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all of these devotees in whose association he performed his pastimes, Narottam Das simply weeps. I assume you know the tune. Anyway, okay. Ye anilo premadana karuna pracho Ye anilo premadana Karuna pracho Hena Prabhu Kota Gela Acharya Thakur Hena Prabhu Kota Gela Acharya Thakur Kahamora Swarup Rupa Kahasanatan Kahamora Swarup Rupa Kahasanatan Kahadasa Raghunatha Patita Pavan. Kahadasa Raghunatha Patita Pavan. Kahamora Bhatta Yoga Kaha Kaviraj. Kahamora Bhatta Yoga Kaha Kaviraj. Ekakale kota gela gora nataraj. Ekakale kota gela gora nataraj. Pashane kotibo mata Anale Pashibo Pashane Kotibo Mata Anale Pashibo Goranga gunera nide kota gele pabo. Goranga gunera nide kota gele pabo. Se sabasangira sange Ye koilo pilas Se sabasangira sange Ye koilo pilas Se sangana paya kande narotamadas Sangana Paya Kande Narotamadas. Ye Anilo Premadana Karuna Pracho. Ye Anilo Premadana Karuna Pracho. Hena Prabhu Kota Gelara Acharya Thakur. Hena Prabhu Kota Gelara Acharya Thakur. Srila Bhaktivinoda, Srila Bhaktivinoda, Srila Bhaktivinoda, Srila Bhaktivinoda. Srila Bhaktivinoda, Srila Bhaktivinoda, Bhaktivinoda, Srila Bhaktivinoda. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad Paramahangsa Parivrajak Charis Tadasismat His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jayam Vishnupad Paramahangsa Parivrajak Charis Tadasismat His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki, Shri Shri Radharanath Ki, Shri Giri Govardhan Ki, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki, Sankirtan Yagya Ki, Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yes, so today is the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So we are fasting till midday, and around that time, I'm not exactly sure, but around that time will be the Pushpanjali, Pushpa Puja for Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who is there on our second Vyasasan. So that's very nice. And what we will do, we'll go through some biographical notes, different things which he did and things which happened, which he was involved in. It's a very interesting story. And of course, it's also the disappearance day of Sri Gadadhar Pandit from the Panchatattva, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. We don't have so much biographical information about Gadadhar Pandit. I mean, there is some in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Oh gosh, there's some really interesting things, and Chaitanya Bhagavat. So we'll say just a little bit about that. So, yes. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchkalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha Paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Excuse me. So there are biographies of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur which explore his childhood and youth and just the whole story. And there's actually an autobiography he wrote himself about his life. We'll just look at a little bit about his younger years and mainly focus on his adult years. So, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur appeared in this world in 1838. 1838, what, getting on for 200 years ago from now. So he appeared there in not exactly a Vaishnav family. His childhood, there's sort of different phases in it, and Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his childhood and early youth, say, the family faced a lot of difficulty, and they were sort of bankrupted, and the family, just when he was small, like 5 years old or so, he couldn't stay with his parents. They didn't really have a suitable place for a family to live. So it was difficult. And like we said, they were not Vaishnavas. They were more like, you would say, Hindu people who are involved in demigod worship and things like that. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as he grew up a little, started going to school and then into like some form of higher education, he became really stimulated by hearing some things about Lord Chaitanya. Actually, let me just mention, it's just a little biographical note. As was the practice in those days in India, he was officially married at the age of 12 to a girl who was 5. Hare Krishna. Anyway, that happened. Of course, they were not staying together until they were, at least into their later teens or thereabouts. And she later passed away, somewhat later, and then Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur married his second wife, Bhagavati Devi, who gave birth to most of his children. They were altogether something like 10 children, one of whom, of course, was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But anyway, just in regards to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his name by birth, given by his family, was Kedarnath Dutt. So the family line was Dutt. And it's kind of the same type of family line as Srila Prabhupada's. Basically, Vaishya, a Vaishya family. And Kedarnath, of course, is a name of Lord Shiva. So, but then as he came into his teens and later teens, he started hearing about Lord Chaitanya. An interesting and just very sort of telling point, very unfortunate point, is that at that time, Vaishnavism, particularly in Bengal, was not taken seriously by the people in general, or at least by the more intelligent people. As Prabhupada said, it was often taken as a poor excuse for collecting donations, going out and just begging, basically, in the streets. And the Vaishnavas at that time, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas in Bengal, they were followers of Lord Chaitanya in name, but in terms of practice and their activities, they were, the great majority at least, were in one school or another of Sahajya practice. Yes, one type or another of Sahajya, Gauranga Nagaris, and all sorts, bowels, the bowels, oh, Krishna, Atibadis. There's a number, I forget the number, but it's around 10 specific lines from Lord Chaitanya, but they're all quite heavily deviated. I mean, really very heavily deviated, and some of them were into the sort of classic Sahajya practice of imitating the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. And a man would say he's Krishna, and he'd find some woman, and say she is Radha, and they would have pastimes together, quote unquote, which was just an excuse for illicit sex life. It really was. It really was. And so, therefore, naturally, sincere people who are actually interested in practicing Krishna consciousness properly and truly following Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they rejected them. They really rejected them, and they're really worthy of being rejected. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur also, at least in his early days, he didn't take Lord Chaitanya seriously. He didn't take Vaishnavism and Gaudiya Vaishnavism seriously. Yes. But then, a little later on, maybe when he was in his late teens, or even in his 20s actually, he came across some literature about Lord Chaitanya and some devotees, because there were just a very small number, but there were some real Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. Yes, so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, it was astonishing how much Vaishnavism had deteriorated. So there, in that early point in his life, well before he reached 30, well before, like probably more, plus or minus 20, he heard about Lord Chaitanya and Bhaktivinoda, Kedarnath Dutt. He really became attracted to Lord Chaitanya, very fascinated by Lord Chaitanya. And so he decided, I must get a copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita and really make an in-depth study of Lord Chaitanya and everything to do with him. So he tried to find, this is in Bengal, in Bengali language, he tried to find a copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Eventually he found a copy when he was 30. In 1868, he managed to locate and acquire a copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he read the whole thing. And in this way, he became completely convinced of Lord Chaitanya as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he really became a real practitioner of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So by that time, in fact, in his 20s, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was a very intelligent person, and he was what they call in technical language a polyglot, if you know what that means. Someone who can speak like many languages, not just 2 languages or 3, but like several languages, who's competent in several languages. And he learned English. Among other languages, he learned Persian, Bengali, of course, was his mother tongue, and Hindi he knew, as do most people in northern India, and other languages too, he knew well. And because he was fluent in English, he was able to get a job working for the English government. I mean, the government of India, which was basically made up of British people, and in the lower echelons, some local people. So he got a job teaching English. in the school system of the government. And he was so accomplished and so expert in English that the English people he was working with, they really appreciated him as being highly educated. So after some time, in 1871, he was engaged as a magistrate, a deputy magistrate actually, in government service. Actually, the highest position that an Indian person could reach in government service those days was to be a deputy magistrate, the actual, like, the magistrate. The magistrates were all British. So he was appointed as a deputy magistrate. And in 1871, he was posted to Jagannath Puri on his request. He was posted to Jagannath Puri as the deputy magistrate. And effectively, because a lot of the British people couldn't speak the local languages, then even though they were in higher positions in the administrations in the different regions, but their involvement would not be very great. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur Kedarnath Dutt, as deputy magistrate, he was basically running the Jagannath Puri district, the whole area, as deputy magistrate. Deputy magistrate was kind of like, effectively like the governor in whatever region he would be posted. So he, among other things, he was running the Jagannath temple and various other things, and running the finances of the area, the administration of that area. And some interesting things happened while he was in that position. A number of interesting things. One interesting thing was that when Bhaktivinoda Thakur went through the financial records of the Jagannath Puri temple, he found that the king, there was sort of a nominal king, or even a little more than nominal, but still he was controlled by the British, so he was not like the king. He found that the king of Puri had been borrowing money from the temple, as they say sometimes, borrowing on a no-return basis. He was not paying the money back. He was just taking money and using it to finance a very opulent and extravagant lifestyle. A lot of parties, all big social events and all that sort of thing. And as a result, he was in debt to the temple for like millions, And Bhaktivinoda Thakur found out about this. And because the king, who is not really, the king who can just tell people what to do and do what he likes, the king had to take the matter seriously. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur did a calculation of how much the king owed and presented a demand to the king that you must pay X amount, and really a very substantial amount. The king obviously didn't want to do that. So what the king did in the basement of his palace, underground, he had some tantric Brahmins do a special tantric puja, the conclusion of which would be that when the final oblations were offered into the fire, with the final mantras, Bhaktivinoda Thakur would drop dead. So they did that for 1 month. It was all in secret. But it was a major thing. It was going on 24 hours a day for 1 month. Finally, the time came to offer the final oblations and the final mantras into the fire. So the king gathered his family around this big fire, not like one of our little havan kunds for our ceremonies here, but like a really big fire. They gathered around him and his wife and his children. And so they offered, the final mantras were chanted, and the final whatever items they offered to the fire, they were offered. And as all this was just happening, the oldest son of the king just collapsed into the fire and died. Yeah, they couldn't save him. So then the word got out, and the king was, you could say, chastened by the whole experience. So over a period of time, he paid back the debt on Bhaktivinoda Thakur's insistence. There's another very famous incident, or like a whole story, surrounding Bhaktivinoda Thakur with one bogus avatar named BCaiS. So BCaiS, he claimed to be, there were a number of bogus avatars who Bhaktivinoda Thakur brought to justice, because, believe it or not, in those days in India, it was illegal to claim you were an incarnation of God, unless you were. If you were, that was okay. But if you weren't, it was a criminal act. It's not now. You can do it. You can't claim you're the president of the country or prime minister, whatever. You can't even claim you're a policeman unless you really are. But an incarnation of God, you can go for it. And as Srila Prabhupada said, at least in America, not only will you not be arrested for claiming you're an incarnation of God, when obviously you're not, but you can form your own religious organization and get tax deduction on donations. Yes. So there was a number. There was one, even this BCaiS claimed to be Mahavishnu, and there was another one who claimed to be Mahavishnu. But BCaiS was the main one. He had like fairly significant mystical powers, and if anyone protested against him, or, made some allegations that he's not who he claims to be, he would attack them with his mystical powers. And in many cases they die because he really had mystical powers. He had long hair, and he could make sparks and things come out of his hair. And he could do things like kill people with his mystical powers. But he used to, he had so many followers, just a vast number. And he would tell them, the men, the married men, that you should leave your wife with me for one night. You can come back in the morning and get her. And I will bless her. Do some special thing to bless her. So, of course, some people understood that, you don't do this. But they came to difficult ends. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur understood this man is just too much. So, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the British authorities in the area, their objection to BCaiS was that he was telling people to rebel against the British and just kick the British out of the country. So he was kind of developing a bit of a revolution. So they wanted him arrested on that basis. So therefore Bhaktivinoda Thakur arrested him. And when he arrested him, this is now from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, all over Puri there were disturbances. At that time the Puri school had a fire, and all of the people suspected him. Also at this time, Kadur, a pet name for his daughter, Kadambini, was the name of his daughter, Kadambini, came down with fever. BCaiS, by his practice of yoga, had by some means attained yogic powers, and I obtained a lot of evidence against him. For 21 days he did not eat or drink even a drop of water, but he did not show any weakness, and gave unfailing cures to many people. So he was really quite a character, BCaiS. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur would not be intimidated. So he brought him to trial, particularly on the basis of trying to sort of foment a revolution against the British government. So the trial went on. Thousands of the yogis' followers gathered outside the courtroom every day, chanting, "Injustice, injustice." It was a really big scene. So finally, at the end of a fairly long trial, he was sentenced to some number of years' imprisonment. Even in the courtroom, he would produce some, sparks and fire from his hair. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he mentions here how his daughter came down with fever, but actually we understand eventually the entire family did. And, big family, as we said, very big family. And some of them were on the edge of death. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, on the day of the final sentencing, he was unable to walk. he had to be carried right into the courtroom to deliver the verdict and the sentence. So he did that, and the man was to be imprisoned as BCaiS was led out of the courtroom to the cells at the back. One of the young British officers jumped on him from behind and just sort of pushed him to the ground and was just on top of him. And BCaiS, face down on the floor in the courtroom. And this young British officer had what they call a huge pair of scissors. That's pretty big. And he just hacked at the fellow's hair because he understood his power has something to do with his hair. So he hacked his hair just wildly, with BCaiS trying to resist. So BCaiS ended up like some sort of, misfit punk rocker whose haircut's just sort of gone wrong, sort of thing. Yeah, and he looked bizarre. But he lost his powers. And immediately Bhaktivinoda Thakur felt fine, and his whole family immediately on the spot. Right at that time, they all felt fine, because his power was in his hair. That's why in occult circles, women are more prominent, because they generally have longer hair and therefore have greater mystical powers. What do you think of that? I don't know if any of you have mystical powers. She may have, yeah. Anyway, excuse me, but that's what they say, yeah. So he lost his mystical powers completely. They took him away and they shaved his head by force, BCaiS. And so he completely lost his mystical powers. And after 1.5 years in jail, he died before his sentence was finished. Yes, so different things happened. Different things happened. Let's just see here. Different things happened. On February the 6th, 1874, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was born in Puri, in the house of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which is now a temple. It's a Gaudiya, quite a substantial Gaudiya Math temple, the birthplace of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Anyway, in 1887, he was transferred again by his insistence and even threatening to quit. He was transferred to Krishnanagar, which is the biggest, it's a city now, more or less. Not far from Mayapur, it's about a half-hour drive or something like that from Mayapur. And it's on the edge of the dam there. So when he was in Krishnanagar, a number of things, really important things happened. Let's see. So it was November the 15th, 1887, he was transferred to Krishnanagar. And so he would go and visit all the places of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes often. By 1891, he started doing a lot of research into where is Lord Chaitanya's birthplace actually, because there was some controversy. Not so much. Most of the Vaishnav people there felt the birthplace was on the other side, the western side of the river, of the Ganges. And if you go there today, if you can find it, there's still a birthplace there with a tree, a neem tree, and a little hut and everything, just on the northern side of Navadvip town. So, but Bhaktivinoda Thakur, through his extensive research, he concluded that couldn't be the birthplace, because it was described as being on the eastern side of the river, and Navadvip town had been in the same place for hundreds of years. So he found a place which he thought, which actually there were some Gaudiya Vaishnavas there, and they were saying this is the birthplace actually. So he concluded that it's very likely to be, but how to establish it? So at the time, from the time he'd been there, he'd been associating with Jagannath Das Babaji, who was the leader of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas in the area. Jagannath Das Babaji was of an unknown age at that time, because he didn't know when he was born. Nobody knew, but he was well over 100. They say 120 or maybe 130. And he couldn't walk, he couldn't open his eyes. He had to be carried everywhere in a basket, and his eyes had to be held open for him to see anything. So his assistant, one Krishna Das, carried him with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. They went to this place, and when they got there, Jagannath Das Babaji's eyes were held open. He looked around. There was like a little forest of tulsi. And Jagannath Das Babaji became ecstatic and started shouting, "This is the place, this is the place." And he jumped out of the basket and started dancing, even though he couldn't walk. And he jumped 12 feet into the air, repeatedly, celebrating. So that was some time between 1891 and 1895. In 1895, Bhaktivinoda Thakur started raising money for building a proper temple at the birthplace. And he raised all the money single-handedly, 1 rupee at a time. He would not accept more than 1 rupee from anyone. And some people, like business people, they'd offer 10 rupees or 100 rupees. He'd refuse. He just took 1 rupee at a time. And that temple, which is still there, it's sort of one of the side buildings at Lord Chaitanya's birthplace. It's still there. So that was 1895. It was opened. Of course, Srila Prabhupada appeared in 1896. In 1896, I'm going to go a little over time, because we're all fasting. Right? Right. Come what may. we will fast. Just till midday. It's okay. So we can go a little over time. Right. So in 1896, he had been, while he was in Puri, he had been writing in English, in different languages, translating from Bengali into English, and just writing in English. And he wrote a book called Lord Chaitanya, His Life and Precepts. And in 1896, he sent a number of copies of that book to different universities in England, in the UK, and in America. English language book explaining about Lord Chaitanya. It's not a big book, but it's got very good information in it. And when Srila Prabhupada in 1966 or 67, that sort of time, when Srila Prabhupada told his disciples about this, that these books had been sent to the libraries, to the universities to include in their libraries, well, the devotees went to the universities and went into the libraries. And sure enough, they found in a number of libraries, they found this book from 1896. And this is like 1966 or 67, so it's 70 years the books had been there. And take a guess what some of the devotees did with those books when they found them. Hare Krishna. Did you say what? No. Yes. I know one at least who stole the one from McGill University. Hare Krishna. Anyway, what can you do? In those days, the devotees were a bit wild. Nowadays, they're much more civilized and responsible. Now, I want to tell you, when did he retire? Have I got when he retired? I'm not sure when he retired, but it was around that time. He was born 1838, so he must have retired around about that time. Right. Yeah. So around that time he retired. But when he was a magistrate, which was up to, 1890 something at least, this was his program. He would get up at 10 o'clock at night, light an oil lamp and start writing. At 4 o'clock in the morning, he would take rest. And he would get up again at 4:30, wash his hands and face and chant japa till 7. At 7 he would write letters. At 7:30 he would read to sometime after 8, like maybe 8:30. At 8:30 or thereabouts, he'd receive guests or he'd continue reading. At 9:30 or sometime after 9, he would take rest again and get up at 9:45 for his morning bath. He would take his full morning bath at 9:45, and he'd take breakfast, which would consist of usually half a liter of milk, 2 chapatis, and some fruit. Then 9:55, he'd go to the court because he's the magistrate, he's hearing cases. He'd go to court in a carriage, and in the court he would wear coat and pants with double-sized tulsi neck beads and strong tilak. He was very strong in his decisions. He would decide immediately, and he did not allow any humbug in his court. No upstart could stand before him. He would shave his head monthly. He never allowed harmonium, and he never had any debts. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the court would finish. He'd go home. 10 o'clock the court began. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, court finished. He'd come home and bathe, and 2 o'clock go back to the court if there was any need. Otherwise, he would translate. But often he'd have to go back to court. So he'd come back at 5 and translate from Sanskrit to Bengali. Then he would take his evening meal, main meal, rice, 2 chapatis, sabji, and another half liter, they say, of milk. Then 7:30 or 8 in the evening he'd take rest, and as we said, he would get up at 10 o'clock at night. Yes, so now those of you who've been there would know that there is a house of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur which is there on Godrum Dweep. It's the same side of the river as Krishnanagar, the southern side of the Jalangi, it's a branch of the Ganges. So in 1888, he bought that house. If you've been there. You been there? Of course you've been there. You been there? Why not? Anyway. Huh? Swarupganj, yeah. Is the sort of like the village, sort of a village. So he bought that and started living. He only actually bought it in 1888, but he only came to live there in 1894. In 1899, I'm mixed up. In 1888, he bought Surabi Kunj, which is down the road and on the other side of the road from his house. In 1894, he came to live in Surabi Kunj. Surabi Kunj is famous because this is where Lord Nityananda lived and where he started the Namahata movement and where he developed it from. So yeah, Surabi Kunj is an important place. So in 1894 he came to live there. In 1899 he bought Swananda Sukhada Kunj, which is sort of, and he built the house there. That's the place which is more famous as his residence. Although at Surabi Kunj, they have rooms which they say he lived in, and they have one little book with his signature in it and different things. Right, so that was 1899. So, following in the footsteps of Lord Nityananda, Bhaktivinoda Thakur restarted the Namahata movement in a big way. He's now retired, so he started really preaching full time and traveling around Bengal and northern Orissa preaching and establishing namahattas. And in some places, oftentimes they would just use someone's house or an existing temple or something of that sort. But in some villages, they would build their own places, their namahatta center. And I was told, at least, when our devotees started developing namahatta in Bengal, they were going around village to village to village. There's so many, and there's so many devotees, and they'd do a program, and then they'd tell the people, we can do a regular program. Do you want us to come? And the people said, yeah, well, we have a regular program already. In fact, we have a center. And they would take the devotees, just in a handful of cases, to this little building, which was their namahatta center. And the devotees would go in, and on the altar was a picture of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And the people told the devotees, yes, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he started this. He had this center built. It's interesting. So he really spread it in a big way. And just bear with me. It's interesting how he ran the namahatta. He would distribute the holy name, because namahatta, nama is the holy name, of course, and hatta means marketplace. So he would distribute the holy name to the people on different levels in terms of the amount of faith that he perceived the particular individuals to have. So he distributed the holy name, first of all related to first of all just the holy name. Then the holy name related to the Lord's form was a level up. Then the holy name on the level of the Lord's qualities was another level up. Then the holy name on the level of the Lord's pastimes was even higher up. Then the holy name on the level of bhava was higher up, and the holy name on the level of prema was the highest level. And he had a second system on the basis of faith. You could not buy, but if you had faith on the level of Shraddha, you would get a credit of 1 cent of Krishna consciousness. If you had the holy name on the level of Nishta, you would get a credit for the holy name for 5 cents. On the level of Ruchi, for the holy name for 20 cents. For Asakti, if you're on the level of Asakti, the holy name on the level for 25 cents. If you had bhava, you could get the holy name for $1. And on the level of prema, you would get a gold coin of faith. So a very interesting system he had. And he had various venues, bazaars, they would call them bazaars, which were holy places or temples, where they would distribute the holy names and preach. Then small centers with a few members. Then they had traveling salesmen, sales agents, and brokers. The devotees who were in charge, like of a district, and overseeing the preachers and the preaching in that district, they were called brokers of the holy name in the Namahata, the marketplace. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur would not accept counterfeit currency, meaning that you just act like you're attached to the holy names, but you're not actually attached, you're just putting on an act. And if someone came and they had counterfeit faith, then they were given namabas. They were not given the pure name. So, they had different posts. The leaders of the Namahata program who'd make policy decisions within the Namahata movement, the market reporter who would come report back with information on how many people have taken up the chanting of the holy names, the scale operator who would check the payments if they really did have faith to the level that they were thought to have faith. Then the laborers who would deliver the goods, they deliver the holy names. The watchman, there were watchmen who would see if anyone came and tried to steal the holy name. There were bookkeepers who'd keep track of all the preaching and how many people and all that. And then finally there was the janitor, the cleaner, who would keep the Namahata, keep the marketplace clean. And that was Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He took the role of janitor to make sure that the Namahata didn't become some sort of material type of institution, but it remained pure Krishna conscious marketplace all over Bengal and northern Orissa. So he took Babaji in 1908 in Puri from Gorkishore Das Babaji Maharaj. And he passed away in Puri on this day in 1914. So 108 years ago. Very auspicious. 108 years ago today. At that time it was June the 23rd. He left this world. And today is his disappearance day. It's also the disappearance day of Gadadhar Pandit, but I don't think we've got time for that. So, Hare Krishna. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki. Go Premanande. Hare Krishna. I don't suppose anyone's got a question or a comment. I wouldn't expect it. So it's okay. Hare Krishna. Ho Gaya.